Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Siddharth Yadav, a fellow at ORF Middle East, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone. I first also want to thank the AI Impact Summit. As I'm sure everyone in this room knows, the AI Impact Summit is going to be hosted in India from February 16th onwards. And we're very appreciative of the summit and the Indian government for working with us and allowing us to organize this pre-summit event here in Dubai. Now, as we sort of look across the Dubai skyline in a city that's known as the transit hub in the region and for the world, I think it's a very sort of fitting place to talk about important topics such as new corridors for innovation and inclusion. We are here to explore a shift that's happening in technology discussions around the world as people are starting to move away and look away from closed systems towards open systems like digital public infrastructure. Now, the sessions that are going to be taking place today won't just involve technical conversations, but also broader sort of discussions on on the architecture of modern society and how we can make progress and growth in the global south more inclusive. Now, for several years, we've seen sort of pioneering digitization efforts, most notably the India Stack, and how it has allowed a nation to digitize all of its services from identity to payments. We will also see how the progress in digital public infrastructure is sort of changing market dynamics throughout the global south, and what are the opportunities and what are the potential pathways to make this progress more inclusive. Now, for both of these sessions, we have a very wonderful host of experts who hail from countries throughout the global south, from India to Uganda to South Africa to Singapore. And I would now like to invite Mr. Amit Jain, the moderator of our first session, to kick off the proceedings.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Amit Jain. I'm the director of a Singapore-based think tank called the NTU-SPF Center for African Studies. It's the only research center that looks at Africa from Southeast Asia, from a trade, business, and investment lens. So our work is open, it's open public access, and we hope we help explain what are the factors that are transforming the continent to our stakeholders in Asia. So thank you, first of all, ORF, for having invited me for the first time. This is my first engagement here. I'm delighted to be moderating this session. My topic today is called New Diplomacy, the AI-DPI Convergence and Frameworks for Cooperation. Never mind the mouthful. We'll get to that very shortly. What that means is the digital public infrastructure of India, it has transformed the lives of millions. It's best exemplified by the 12-digit Aadhaar national ID and the unified payment interface, which is in short called UPI. Aadhaar is the world's largest digital database. More than a billion people have individual identities. Some 2.6 billion individual financial transactions took place in India in December last year alone. When it comes to direct cash benefit transfers, the impact is even more dramatic. 700 million Indians still live on some sort of a state-funded welfare. In the last financial year, the government of India delivered $85 billion worth of benefit directly to individuals, and this system plugged something like $10 billion US in leakage or corruption. So this has been a game changer for India. So it's no surprise that many of the countries in the global south, those in Africa and elsewhere, see the India digital payment infrastructure as a model worth emulating. So this has provided New Delhi an interesting diplomatic lever, not just to exercise its own foreign policy, but also as a way to promote its South-South cooperation. So with two superpowers, rivals dominating much of the AI space and the global digital architecture, which is increasingly bifurcating along geopolitical lines, there may have emerged a need for new partnership among the global south to discuss this and more, we have an esteemed panel with us. Ernest brings a practitioner's lens to this discussion. He works directly in the real-world application of AI deployment through Sunbird AI. He has first-hand experience of how artificial intelligence can improve public services, but also how data limitations, bias, and design choices can exclude some of the vulnerable sections of the society. Lucona approaches digital transformation through the lens of governance, democracy, and political economy. She's from South Africa, where issues of inequality, state power, and trust, they run deep. And Lucona examines how digital infrastructure reshapes the relationship between citizens, markets, and the state. IFI works with the UNDP and the African Continental Free Trade Area. She focuses on digital infrastructure, identity, payments, and data, and how that can unlock opportunities across borders, especially for SMEs. Thampi is the CEO of Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC. Now, this is a remarkable e-commerce platform which it removes e-commerce from the clutches of few big players, makes it open, interoperable, and governed in public interest. So just as Aadhaar created a foundational digital identity, ONDC attempts something equally ambitious, separates commerce from proprietary platforms. So thank you so much for that, Thampi. I think your intervention here would be very, very important. And finally, Anirban studies India's digital public infrastructure. He examines how Aadhaar, UPI, and data sharing frameworks reshape state capacity, markets, and citizens' rights. So welcome to the discussion, ladies and gentlemen. As a host, I think I should start with you, Anirban. Could you sort of help guide the audience, explain in layman's language what constitutes the India stack, and then I'll follow up with a question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mean, I honestly thought as a host I should probably come last, but this reverses the sequence of things. But, I think I just split my intervention into three parts.
Please.
Right? One,
Please.
the similarity in approaches between what in India we call the DPI approach, and also the ways in which India is approaching AI development, right? That has a bearing on the rest of the discussion. So, first, the similarity between what we call the DPI approach and our approach to AI development. Second, of course, I'd like to focus a little on the convergence between AI and DPI.
Please.
It's really at the
Please.
heart of our conversation today. And finally, and maybe I can come back to this later in our conversation, a little about frameworks of cooperation. Why AI plus DPI as a framework actually holds a lot of appeal for countries. Right. So now, one of the central features of India stack, of digital public infrastructure, is you have this public stack of technologies, which include foundational services like identity, Aadhaar, which Mr. Jay talked about. You also have digital payments. And the use of open source software and interoperable standards allows enterprises of all shapes and sizes to integrate with these services and build solutions on top of them. Okay, so that's essentially how DPI works. Now, in India, we've decided that for AI too, we are going to approach it in a somewhat similar way. So we will have a layer of public resources, and this could be things like shared computing infrastructure, open data sets, all right, certain other common frameworks and tools. And these will then be made available so that enterprises can build AI solutions on top of them. Okay, so this is a congruence of approaches. It's a similarity, but it's not a convergence yet. When we talk about convergence, things move a step ahead and they become infinitely more interesting, all right? And this is where a lot of novel use cases begin to emerge. Now, we need to keep in mind that every layer of DPI, be it identity or payments or consent-based data sharing, this generates very rich data. This is structured, high-quality data. It's very purposive. It's verifiable. And this is exactly the kind of thing, the raw material that is manna for AI development, in a sense. And this is what makes convergence possible. Now, the convergence actually takes place in two ways. You have AI solutions that can be built on top of DPI layers. And AI can also power digital public infrastructure itself and make it more efficient and streamlined in a sense. So let me give you a few examples of both. All right, when we talk about AI being built on top of DPI, let's consider the health sector, for example. India has a large-scale national digital health mission which works at population scale. And the digital health mission connects health records, people's health records across institutions, using health IDs and open standards. Now, another program we have called the National Tuberculosis Elimination Program has decided to use much of this data, these health records, and build on this foundation to develop an AI-powered tool which analyzes chest X-rays. Okay, and this is proving quite transformational when it comes to tuberculosis diagnosis, all right? I mean, looking at early symptoms, looking at prescriptions, looking at treatment. And this information, when shared with patients and health providers, actually changes the way in which TB is being treated in India, all right? So this is an example of an AI solution being built on top of this public infrastructure of health records. Now we also have in India something called the DEPA, the Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture, which is about consent-based data sharing. Right, and some time ago, I mean, DEPA ran a very successful pilot in which sensitive data, from individuals and businesses was being used with their consent, and this is financial data among other things, all right? And these secure controlled environments called confidential computing rooms, CCRs, were developed. And this personal data, this financial data could be put into those rooms and then mined to use for training AI models, all right? So this is another example of how AI is being used across data being generated by DPIs. Now you have the other kind as well. I mean, how is AI actually improving digital public infrastructure itself? Now we've already spoken quite a bit about Aadhaar, for example, right? Our digital ID system. AI is now being used to create voice services. So people can, when they're going to enroll for their digital identity or update or change their identity in some way, can actually use this AI-generated voice service to do so. Okay, and this has generated a lot of traction already. A lot of people are beginning to use it, and it's obviously strengthening Aadhaar as a service itself. We've also talked about digital payments quite a bit, and in India you have the National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI, which is the body that sort of oversees retail payment systems in India, and India is today a world leader in terms of digital payments and the volume of transactions. We have billions of them every day. But that also brings certain risks. So the amount of UPI-related frauds and scams have also begun to rise. So the NPCI has begun to use AI to detect these frauds. And in cases where, let's say, there is a certain fraudulent account that has been detected, all right, an account which is a scam account essentially, when anybody else tries to sort of transfer payments to it, they get these pre-transaction notifications. So, AI is being used for fraud transaction as well in a big way. And what also sort of further unlocks the power of AI and DPI together in more complex ways is when you fuse AI with, let's say, horizontal layers like language, okay, and also vertical layers like agriculture. So we have something called the Kisan e-Mitra solution, which, you have a conversational AI tool which has local language interfaces. So a farmer can actually chat with this tool, all right, and ask for market information about schemes, etc. And then, the Aadhaar, the digital identity, does an eligibility check to see if that farmer is actually eligible for some of these agricultural schemes. Forms get pre-filled in the farmer's favor. And then, the farmer actually gets a message saying, yes, your sort of submission, your application was successfully submitted in the local language that the farmer uses. So again, this is one of those AI-DPI convergent tools which is beginning to transform the agricultural sector. So I'll sort of stop here for now, but come back to frameworks of cooperation later, perhaps.
Thank you so much. I mean, maybe that gets me thinking of moving towards the e-commerce area and ask Thampi, how ONDC is fundamentally different. If you could explain that to our audience here from the traditional digital marketplace, and where do you see the role of AI then coming into your space?
Thank you, Amit. Well, two corrections I'll make.
Please.
Not exactly correct. One is I'm normally known as Koshi, so everybody knows me Koshi.
Okay.
Even my
Koshi.
wife doesn't call me Thambi, so I doesn't know.
Okay. Oh.
Second thing is I'm not currently the CEO of
Okay.
ONDC.
Sorry.
I was a founding managing director and the chief executive, and I relinquished my position in the last few
Understood.
months ago,
Understood.
and now act as an advisor and an evangelist of this idea across the world.
It's wonderful.
So I'm actually now helping a couple of other countries to adopt the same idea
Sure,
and make it.
sure.
So I was always been a practitioner. I was never an academic or a philosopher, but guy who used to do things on the ground. So briefly, if I try
Yeah,
to tell
please.
you, if you look at the internet started as a very democratic place. When Tim Lee created HTTP,
Is everybody able to hear?
can you hear? Or shall I shout further? Okay, so let me just try to throw my voice. When Tim Lee developed HTTP, I mean, internet was there before, but only thing it was a geek's domain. I'm an old man, so I still remember those days. So when Tim Lee developed, he could have created a private network, and he would have been a multi-trillionaire today. But he said, I'm going to make it available as a public good, and made it down there so that the internet got developed on top of it. What we call WWW happened only because he made this as a public good. He could have created another private good, but probably in the world, we would have HTTP and BTTP and probably 3 networks. But it did not go that way. So the whole development across happened because of that. And if you also look at, because the protocol at the bottom was open, there are different kinds of people came and developed a lot of innovations on top of it to help. Like today, even a primary school kid can make a web page because there's a lot of plug and play solutions are there, and all this became possible because it's an open protocol, standard protocol for information sharing. Second time, if you look at the next, first was information sharing, then came messaging, which is remade. There again, SMTP is an open protocol. But when it came to commerce, the world took a different approach. There are few enterprises made private protocol and created walled gardens.
Yeah.
That's what you see everywhere in the world, whether it is a developed country or a developing country. In fact, this has become such a big challenge that there are 2 big problems with this platform walled gardens. One is market concentration. Like if you go to any country, there will be only 2 or 3 enterprises in any particular domain. Like consumer product 1, food 1, mobility 1 or 2, 3, that's it. They will have 70-80% of the market share. And second, which is even worse, is that they have such a stranglehold on the industry that they will do things. They do self-preferencing. I find that your product is doing well in my network, so I ask my friend Amit to start this company. And then you're dead because I control. I have the knowledge. I am the sender point of all knowledge with respect to the market. Where is the demand coming in? Who is coming? Everything. Because you will get very limited information. Just send this stuff to him. That's all you get the information. Otherwise, you have to pay for it. To be visible, you have to pay for it. So all those things happen. And secondly, because of that, there is a squeezing that happens to the industry. A lot of small business die, and big business has a terrible squeeze. In fact, there is a fantastic study done by that lady called Leena Khan, who was a professor at Yale University. I mean, it's a public document worth reading since you're all interested in DPI and the concept behind it. She was later asked by Biden as to be the Federal Trade Commission chairperson. And of course, when Trump came, she sort of lost everything. So if you look at this challenge of self-preferencing and concentration is recognized around the world. So most of the developed countries are trying to go the regulatory way. America developed something called America Innovation and Choice Online Act, which tries to bring regulation to address this. The Europeans look at Digital Market Access Act. If you look at both these things cover the same issue. And the UK has what we call DMCC. And I'm just giving you some throws, you can look at the data. So in India, we decided to go at the technology and the markets way with an enabling regulation. That is what we call the idea of an open network. The protocol that is developed by the same set of collective open source kind of people from Bangalore. I had been a a member of this, what we jokingly say, the Bangalore Mafia, of trying to develop these kind of things as a public good. Been there since even at the other tech. So this protocol, essentially, what does it do? It does two things: unbundle and interoperability. If I just simply say that in any platform, you're all familiar with an Amazon. I mean, it has got different building blocks. One is the seller side, I'm making very simple. One is the buyer side. So a guy in the central holds it together. What is unbundling? Is that seller side can focus on what he's good at selling. Today, if I'm a seller in Amazon, I'm visible only to Amazon. If I also have to be visible in some other network, I have to do a digital and physical integration. Whereas in the case of the internet, if it is using this protocol, once you make yourself visible in the network, you are visible to all the buyer applications. So there could be different buying application coming and helping their buyers to buy whatever that is relevant. So the power moved from the intermediary to the consumer or the seller. Okay. So that's the idea of open network. So I know that I'm eating up too much of time. So the beauty is I'll bring two dimensions for the talks that we are there. One is that when there are lots of people trying to be part of it, if I'm setting up a platform, either I'll succeed or fail. Whereas when a network is being made, a lot of people will try, some will succeed and some will fail. Finally, the network will grow. It means it drives innovation. One of the very critical things for the growth of digital continent is the innovation. Second thing is, in addition to innovation, it will also generate, as he very correctly noted down, significant amount of data. And that data different entities will train their own stuff to bring this learning for different segments, but they're all collectively part of a larger network. So I'm trying to just leave the big picture. We can discuss further, and over to you guys.
Kaushi, very quickly, on the follow-up, very quickly, short answer from you perhaps. How would you ensure that now that AI will come into play, that strengthens competition and inclusion rather than recreate platform monopolies in a different way? Huh?
No. The beauty is AI is giving tools. Like I said, there are lots of people buying application for their kind of people, a lot of selling application. The AI will bring the power to each of this entity to do that, the market access much better.
Yeah. Okay.
So that way, it is not concentration driven. It is essentially the whole idea of competition will be further strengthened. Otherwise, if I am only a one or two platform, all the AI will use only it for my end purpose. Okay, because there are a lot of possibilities. Since there's no competition, I can just go ahead doing the stuff myself.
Let me turn to Lukhona. You probably have studied the India stack far more in detail than some of us. Can you share your thoughts on its applicability, that model's applicability, Africa in general and maybe South Africa in particular? And do you see any limitations in your specific circumstances?
No, thank you, and quite a pleasure to join you here all. There's an interesting conversation that is happening in the continent in Africa, particularly amongst the key role players. And I'm going to quote the CEO of MTN, for example, one of the key players in the African market, and of course, part of the Middle East as well. And he talked about Africa becoming a digital underclass if we are not careful about the advancements that are happening around the world. And I think I'm going to use that as a framing for my discussion today. Because, as developments are happening in different regions, India Stack, we had the European Union Commission President talking about Europe Stack and them wanting to be less dependent on the United States of America's technology and, as their base for digitization. So I think the world is in an interesting place, but as things would have it, countries are also in an interesting space. For example, if you look at South Africa, one of the things that I think is an interesting interplay at a governance level We've recently adopted what we call the Protection of Personal Information Act. So the POPI Act is an interesting thing because it regulates how you can use people's personal information, and that regulates how data can be shared, stored, and regulated. So I think though, overall, with various ambitions, the Africa Free Trade area, which of course must necessitate payment systems that that talk to each other. We've tried in South Africa the Kenyan model of M-Pesa. Didn't work very well in the South African context, and there's a reason for that. And it's what I call, and I think you touched on it, what I call overly formalized economies. So innovation doesn't work well in situations where there are already oligarchs who control particular sectors or control particular markets. And I think in South Africa, for example, we have a serious issue of that, whether you are trying to find opportunities in the transportation models. You've got taxi operators, and these are minibus.
Incumbents.
They are incumbent,
yeah.
they are entrenched,
Yeah.
and they protect their territories.
Strong unions.
Strong unions at a labor level, but even though I don't always agree with the liberals when they say we've got a highly regulated labor market, that's a story for another day. But the point I'm trying to make is that when markets are overly formalized, overly monopolized, innovation actually takes a far slower pace, and it doesn't occur in the rate that you think it would. For example, in more informal markets. I love going to Nairobi because I just find Kenyan people to be very inventive in how they do things and how they manage their everyday life, and partly it's because of the rates of informality in that market. For example, Standard Bank in South Africa was closing at 3:30, and I get to Moi Avenue in Nairobi, and Stanbic is closing at 5:30 p.m. And I thought, why is this? Because they had to adapt to that model. But in the South African context, because they are highly formalized, highly monopolistic, they don't have the pressure to be inventive and to innovate. And therefore, I think that, if you look at transportation, for example, how articulation is achieved within your payment systems, whether it's a public facility, a private facility, but you can find a way in which you can create this DPI to facilitate ease of movement across various providers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that DPI must entirely be a government thing or must be a government facilitated thing. It's a question of how do you create articulation between the private and the public, and of course the civil, which must then utilize this infrastructure. And just lastly, one example I'm going to give. Our Department of Home Affairs has gone quite a way in trying to facilitate this between the banks and Home Affairs, which, where you get your identity document, where you get your passport, you can now go to your nearest bank if it is part of the banks that have registered for this, to facilitate ease of getting certain public goods and so on. So I think, if you talk of the India stack and how we facilitate technology through diplomacy, India and South Africa, very good friends. India and Africa, quite good friends. And a lot of technology transfer has happened. You look at countries like Botswana, who have relied on Indian citizens for diamond polishing, for example, and to a point that they even recalled some of their diamonds from London to say we want to beneficiate them from our soil. So there is great potential, but I do think that we have to be mindful of the real world that is happening around us, where I think that big men politics are going to come back to the fore, and they are going to confuse the innovation space and the technology transfer space, because politics are going to stand in the way. Okay. You are going to be probably told not to do business with that country or the other, but let's leave it there for now.
Interesting. So this just shows how much of diversity that there is in the African market. So what Lukuna says, and this is how I interpret, that a system such as the India stack perhaps has a lot more traction in a market which is more informal. South Africa is a vastly formal economy. So let me then, in that case, come to you, Ernest. Does that mean that in a market such as East Africa and Uganda in particular, a model like the India stack, can be much easily be replicated than perhaps South Africa? Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, the universal answer, of course, is it depends. So I could just say that and stop here, and we move on. But yeah, so I think. So of course, one of the biggest problems in Africa and Uganda, for example, where I come from, is of course uneven consumption of the digital transformation part. People consume it unevenly. And even things like DPI, talk of digital identities or data, because data or payment systems, these also take a different path. So for example, I mean, one interesting example I heard of in Uganda is nomads. So we have nomads in the north of Uganda and the south of Sudan. So nomads, I don't know if you know nomads, they sort of move around with their cattle, the pastoralists. And so one analysis of telecom data, core data records, were showing these SIM cards that kept going on and off, right? And they're wondering what's happening with these networks. Why don't we see? And they found that the nomads, they carry a SIM card, just a SIM card, and they move with their cattle. When they get to a town, they borrow a phone, put it in, do a transaction, they send money, or they do some transaction, pay for stuff, I don't know, sell bullet, they carry guns, And then they sort of take it out, give back the phone, and keep the SIM card, and they sort of just walk around with their cows. And so it's a very informal fabric of society.
Yeah.
And even just thinking about how we apply a stack like the Indian stack to the Ugandan society is quite different. And when we look at DPI, for example, and AI, now that is there, is more like a social infrastructure. You can look at it sort of commercially or also socially, and we sort of target the social societal good of this public infrastructure, more a society infrastructure. And what that means is that the goal is really to bring the people on the margins of society, this uneven consumption of digital technology, the people on the margins, those pastoralists, the people who are sort of left out, the unbanked people, we need to understand how those get into the system. How do you get digital IDs for these people? Sure. It's very complicated.
Very complex.
And so we have to innovate, and maybe I'll talk about AI later, but that's how AI comes in to sort of bridge these gaps.
Thank you. Well, let me turn to Iffy. Iffy, India has at least one advantage over continental Africa, that it is a single country, run in a unified single market with a government, and it has had the benefit of having a very well-developed ICT industry. And so when it comes to AI and all the data that is available in the public domain, India can harness that to its advantage. Nonetheless, what Lukhona earlier alluded to, which is, in the case of Africa, a lot of that is the missing piece. And so, again, my question to you is, from a continental-wide perspective, sitting where you are, your challenges are even more complex when it comes to trying to give Africans digital identity, make cross-border payments possible. It's a lot harder. So what is the AFCFTA, the African Union's thinking on this, perhaps from your point of view?
Right. Thank you for the invitation. So it's interesting, this conversation about the India stack, I am having flashbacks to 2018. I was at the ECA then, and there was the conversation around what India has done. In fact, I remember being asked to write the framework as to how it could be scaled up in Africa. And it's interesting, since that time, if you look at the landscape, you'll see that maybe 5 to 10 countries have created their own identity stack. So while they didn't say go take the India stack,
Sure.
they have built out their own systems, right, over the last, few years now.
Could you name them, the ones that stand out?
Off the top of my head, Ghana, Tanzania, Nigeria, there's a few big economies that have built their own stacks.
Right.
And it's interesting what you say about now as the continent is beginning to mesh, trade-led, is that you have pockets of information.
Yes, correct.
And then the question is, how does that all link? How does that all make sense, especially for transactions? So the first thing I would highlight is that you may have 5 or 6 economies that we might say now are tech first or almost tech first. You might have, say, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, who you can go in and not carry cash. You will get there, make a payment, do everything on, and it's fine. Then you have those that are progressing towards that, and you have those that still have perhaps quite a bit of a journey there.
Correct.
And they're all now in this one big space of a market. And so it's interesting to see, from my point of view, the things that people are doing practically to address these issues. So for payments, for example, the African Export-Import Bank has what they call the Pan-African Payments. So the Afrexim Bank has what they call the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Platform. And so this is, an institutional approach to saying all the central banks can sort this out, right? They're all on the board of Afrexim anyway.
Yeah. Listen to this. This is very important. Not many people know about this initiative done called PAPS.
Yes, PAPS, yes. And so it's essentially saying, you guys, instead of going through SWIFT and every other system that you would, why don't you just link? You are all the banks, right? You own Afrexim Bank. Yeah. You are the board of Afrexim Bank. And then what's really key here is also the cost of that. So instead of paying fees to someone else and then transferring, you just say, you know what, I'll pay you this. And I know it's T+1. And so what we're beginning to see is that the cost of transactions is coming down. The time for transactions is also coming down. And then all of that converting to foreign currency back and forth, also the need for that is a lot less because you're able to interact. Now, beyond institutions, we're also seeing the private sector. So with MTN now, you can sit in, say, Ghana or Kenya and use your phone and transfer to the next person who has an MTN thing. So we're also beginning to see the private sector building out their own solutions around that, where they have presence. I think eventually we will then get back to the question of how to integrate, but for now, they're beginning to be built out in pockets. There have also been a few initiatives in the private sector around commerce, where they say, you know what, if you have an ID from this platform, I also will see the same ID and I'll accept it. So it's a really interesting time on the continent to see how people are trying to approach those things. In terms of a continental push for ID, which I think you asked, when you talk about that, then you begin to touch on the issue of sovereignty, which everybody's sensitive about, because it's my ID, it's my people, it's my territory. Why do you want to talk to me about it, right? But it's interesting within that frame of, it's my space, don't touch it, we're beginning to see really practical approaches among the countries. So Namibia and Botswana allow people move around on their ID. You have the same in West Africa with with ECOWAS, with East Africa as well. So within that, okay, I'm the boss here. You also have where there's agreement and where there's trust. You, especially amongst the blocks, you see the practical mechanisms by which they have done this. And I think that would be what would work when it's then scaled up across the continent. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. So, Anirban, this is the kind of challenge that Africa has, very unique. And perhaps that gives you some food for thought in responding. What lessons, early lessons, can continental Africa, maybe within the AFCAT framework, take before it starts to move forward with the DPI and all the India stack model, if at all wanted to go in that direction?
I mean, Well, I certainly think, and this is of course happening. Digitalization still needs to happen
Yes.
across on a very large scale, on scale,
On a scale.
at population scale, and of course, data has to be data troves have to be created.
Correct.
All right, and some of this can be made available as open data, of course, for solutions to be developed. But one also needs strong data protection regimes in place. All right, for this data to be used securely and well and with consent. So using data responsibly goes hand in hand with digitalization, and both are
And
needed.
hence the challenge, because not
Yeah.
every African sovereign state has that capacity to build. South Africa does, maybe some others don't.
Correct. And look, in India too, it took us a long time it was only a couple of years ago that we finally came up with our data protection law, right? After years of debates and discussion.
Sure.
So it's a long and difficult process, but one, does have to go through that. The thing is, when we talk about DPI in particular, there has been DPI-related diplomacy and knowledge sharing for many years now. And this has been happening in a number of different ways. We have this MOSIP platform, through which India is actually helping a number of other countries develop their...
Could you explain that for those of us who don't understand what
Okay,
MOSIP
so
is?
MOSIP stands for Modular Open Source Identity Platform. And it's a kind of a medium through which India is partnering with other countries, mostly in the global south, to help them develop their digital identities, their national digital ID programs, somewhat. So we kind of share the tools and know-how that we use to build Aadhaar, and that helps these countries. And, a number of countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, Philippines, for example, have built their identity systems based on this. A couple of years ago, DPI really occupied center stage during India's G20 presidency. That was a big plank of India's sort of discussions at the G20. And I think that was really when India took DPI to the world and we popularized the idea of the India stack. And a number of MOUs were signed during that year, with at least 8 to 10 of them with developing countries. And we've begun working with some of them actively on developing digital payment systems, ID systems, et cetera, right? And, apart from this, there are a host of bilateral agreements and conversations that we've begun entering into with countries in Asia, Latin American countries, to help them build payment systems, et cetera. And, the good thing is that it's not just developing countries in the global south, even advanced economies, the EU as an entity, for example, has now begun to recognize the power of DPI and its use as a tool for promoting development in third countries. All right, so you have countries like Japan, EU, et cetera, who are working with India to take this to other parts of the world. And it was very encouraging when a couple of years ago, the Quad, all right, Australia, Japan, US, all of them came together and endorsed the idea of DPI and came up with this set of principles for developing and deploying DPI, all right? So the interest is widespread. Now, when it comes to AI, AI cooperation and diplomacy on this scale has not begun yet. But increasingly, we are beginning to see that, the two ends of the spectrum of the AI development chain are dominated by two superpowers, all right? So you have high-end innovation and computing infrastructure, which the US has a stranglehold on. At the lower end, China controls critical minerals, which are used to make the chips that power AI, all right? So this puts countries in the middle in a rather vulnerable position. And this also means that we need to see new partnerships among these countries, which are many of the same countries that are actually partnering on DPI, all right? They need to come together, pool knowledge, pool resources, and see how they can sort of develop AI tools together, right? So you have this concept of tech middle powers, which means countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, Japan, and lots of global south countries as well. They need to come together and work on AI development as well. And given that there's a big overlap between the countries that are interested in DPI and these middle powers, it stands to reason that they will be very interested in this convergence of AI and DPI and how they might work together. So, yeah.
Thank you. Koshi, a lot of the e-commerce revolution that you have, growth that you've seen in India is now, you're witnessing that across Africa as well. But what institutional regulatory conditions would you reckon would be essential for many of the African countries to put in place before something like ONDC can be implemented? Institutional frameworks required before the implementation of that platform.
Let me just try to put a slightly
Please.
largish kind of picture up from the discussion
Please,
that we
please,
had.
please.
See, the spirit of DPI, okay, it essentially says the foundational rail
Yeah.
should be made common for the whole economy to use. It doesn't say that when you say India stack, it is not like a technology to take from there. So 3 layers. At the bottommost is the identity layer. India, say I remember I was involved in the UI design. One of the biggest challenges that we face, I'm just taking an example to sort of put, is that there are a lot of companies who are making ID. Many of the countries, many of them had even in Africa implemented that. The challenge, they were using the proprietary technology,
Right.
which made on an average the cost of per pop about $10. Okay. So what did India say? It says that let us try to use open source technology and try to use in a very competitive fashion one, so that we were able to do it at a $1 plus. Second thing is, keep the role of the ID limited and make it interoperable for anybody to use it. It only does one thing, it doesn't look at citizenship, it doesn't look anything. It only proves Koshi is Koshi. So if you look at that as a foundational layer, so it doesn't say that you have to take anything. There's nothing Indian about it. It's just a philosophical talk about interoperability. All throughout you would see this. Then another thing that Anirban very correctly explained, said, now that we developed it, instead of trying to sell and make money, we said we will make an open source.
Make it open, yeah.
So it's like MOSIP is just a implementation of this open source, which you can freely take it without any help. I was involved in the Philippines project, so I know. Or if you want somebody to implement, they may ask for money. But India doesn't ask for money.
Okay.
That is a base layer. Second layer is payment, because when you look at looking at the various elements of components that will make the industrial activity or economic activity much more seamless and much more smooth, much more efficient, much more productive. So IDT came. Can you use now to do that for KYC in a very smooth and easy fashion, so that it can be used by any entity, a banker trying to give me a bank account, or telecom company giving me a SIM, or a mutual fund trying to, because in every business economic transaction, it is very important to get an identity, to find out who you are, KYC. So can we use a component which is easily usable? That's it. Then level come to the base layer, because in any economic transaction you need payment.
Sure.
So the idea, what India said is nothing but, can we have an open protocol? Anybody to use it? So
There's a reason why I'm asking this, and I want to sort of, try and get you to address the e-commerce part of that space, is if you look at the growth of e-commerce across continental Africa, it's largely driven by Chinese platforms.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you, so that's where I'm coming from.
There are two parts to it. So where somebody is driving a closed walled garden platform. So the idea is like people adopted HTML. First thing is there an initiative that can come to bring an open protocol for empowering small businesses to come to a network? So the key thing that is that it is more than the regulator. It is an endorsement and support. In fact, I'm just going through the similar process in Indonesia. In fact, in Indonesia, Open Network is going to be curtain raiser next week. So last 3 months, I was working very closely. They also had the same kind of challenge. So from an implementation point of view, it is not the regulator, something they have to make any new regulation or anything. It is a point of saying that can we endorse and empower an open protocol? Either you make yourself or you make something that is available free and build on it. And then it becomes, the key thing is that is there is the underlying interoperability. But then everything about data protection, payment protection, fraud control, these are nothing to do with just e-commerce. Those are components. Payment is all about payment system. So that payment system challenges is there in any industry, nothing about e-commerce. So the key thing that is there is, can we create a interoperable means for multiple enterprises to talk to each other? And can the government play an active role in endorsing
That's
and
a big question.
supporting?
That's a big
Without for example, even
That's
in,
big.
without, they don't have to run a platform. They should not even try to do it. Because you need to get it has to be done by the private sector. Because they are the one, the agility, and you need to have the agility to take any new things. So if the typical PSU will not be able to have the agility to bring the new technology.
Sure.
But they act as an endorsement and an enabler. So that kind of support, even for example, let's say there are a lot of digitization effort by various men, whether it is agriculture, I'll just take 30 second, agriculture or MSME. Okay, tell them fantastic, but you make sure that these are all protocol compliant, so that they become a part of the larger network. So they are not doing anything new, because there are so many initiatives. Go to any country, I'm sure that I've come to a number of African countries, they all have digitization program.
Yeah.
Agriculture digitization program, MSME digitization program, artisan digitization program, some funded by various entities. But if they all agree that they all use a common open protocol instead of trying to make a proprietary solution by a larger site,
Got it.
then it will collectively build up to a larger network. So that nudging, forcing, or whatever you call it, agree on a standard protocol to talk to each other, that's a critical thing.
Okay. So, Anis, let me turn to you now. I mean, given that a lot of the global AI models are trained on non-African data today, what risks are you seeing? And perhaps, Lukona, you can come in after that as well on the same question. What risks do you see for Africa trying to develop and adapt foundational models such as the DPI so, yeah, your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I was in a conference, I don't know, end of last year in South Africa, and I was talking to a German national, and he was asking me what I do, and I was telling him I work on African languages. We build African language tech. And he thought, that's not a big problem. Why would anyone want to work on that? And I asked him, how many languages do you have? And he said,
Take a guess.
We have German and maybe one more. I said, man, we have 50 languages in Uganda. It's like,
just in Uganda alone.
Just Uganda alone. So 50 kilometers in any direction, you're going to have to get another language. And so if people need to consume technology, there's no way they can do it without language. And so this is sort of a civic infrastructure we need to build, and that's why building these things is important.
So what are the risks?
The risks. Yeah, so the risks, of course, currently we have to build off of other foundational models. The risks, of course, is that these things don't represent inherent cultural things and contextual things in Africa, of course. They have certain biases that you have to try and debias them. And these are even nuances in languages. Even different languages have different nuances. And so we always have to weigh, of course, the potential benefit of doing this and sort of the risk that is there. And this is a trade-off we have to make for each of the things we're trying to do. So if you want to have effective inclusion into this DPI, for example, people to be able to consume infrastructure, technology, then you need to do the risks. Do we build a model from scratch? Do we collect all that data? Do we get all the energy and data centers and cloud compute to do that?
Huge investments. That will require.
Yes, huge investments. And this is not appropriate at this time. So at this time, we're trying to train and debias existing models. But in the future, the next 8-10 years, perhaps.
Lukona?
Look, I mean, I think there are a couple of risks, and one thing that we don't speak about often about Africa is just how under-electrified the continent is. So there's an energy gap that this conversation actually does not apply to probably 60%, 65% of the citizens of the African continent, because they don't have the foundational tool, which is electricity. Because when we talk about connectivity, of course, there's an interesting debate in the continent. It'd be interesting to hear what is the attitude of the room on Starlink. There's a big question around Starlink and trying to get that connectivity in a way that, bridges the gap of under-electrification. So whilst the language development part of it is very important, in actual fact, you remind me of a time when the matriculation results were going to be issued by a former minister of basic education, and she proudly came with a robot to make an announcement, and it couldn't pronounce her name because it's not coded in the languages that, you know, and she has a Pedi surname. And it was not coded to speak in Isipedi. And I thought that was quite an embarrassment. She was very proud to, you know, throw this robot around at the announcement. But I felt, no, but it can't speak your language. There's a problem here that we must deal with. And I think those are issues. I think AI's other risk, particularly in a country and a continent like ours, is its ability to be impersonal. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing about technology. I actually have a belief that AI is going to run itself to a cliff very soon. It's got no longevity of centuries and centuries of survival, because human beings, I mean, the Japanese actually have this experience. They tried to automate an entire hotel, and they got responses from
people
the
don't like
clientele. People just didn't like it. They didn't like being served by robots. They didn't like robots coming to clean their rooms. They didn't like being greeted by robots. And they said, no, thank you. We want human beings. So I think it's going to be an interesting interaction of how much do we get AI to have personality, and how much do we remove humans from human to human interaction. And my view is that as we debate this, we must try and take a long-term perspective and understand the cultural and language nuances of various peoples. The nomads will continue to be the nomads, whether they are in Uganda or in Turkey or wherever, they'll continue to be nomads, and they want to live that life. How do we accommodate that, and how do we utilize AI in such a way that it doesn't scare people? Because I think the other risk is that AI does scare people, but AI is a bit messy, and we see it in democracy work, where AI generates information falsely. Now you no longer know whether it's Trump talking, or Kani talking, or Modi talking, because AI's ability has gone that far. So I think that moderation of reality and trying to humanize AI is going to be the biggest risk that we are going to deal with
very articulately. Thank you so much. No, I couldn't but ask Iffy as well. You know, where do you think AI most risks excluding people across the continent, particularly in the use of public services? And also, coming from UNDP, I think there are some safeguard playbook that the UNDP has published. Could you just give us a sense and talk about that? What are those things that they have suggested?
Right, okay. So starting with the question on risks, I think the gentlemen have spoken quite articulately. But I think overall, one risk we will find and one would be wary of is just those who have may have more, those who don't have will not have, right? So if, for example, say from a trade point of view, you're an SME, you have access to the internet, you have a fair sense of AI or technology, you'll do more as it evolves. But if you don't have access to it now, what becomes of you as it becomes more sophisticated, right? So these are the kinds of things that we need to approach. Now, in terms of safeguards, there's a whole initiative around that, and there's a website as well. Please feel free to go and read it.
It's very useful.
It's quite interesting, but it's around just issues of sovereignty. It's also around issues of protecting the subject, the person. So how do you identify the person?
Yeah.
How do you use their info? How can you exchange it? Under what principles, in what context can that happen? If you say we're all going to make a link and we're all going to do this, how much info do you really need? So it's a very practical toolkit, and we're very proud of the fact that we didn't sort of invent it, but it was really through talking with those who practice, those who work in this field, those think tanks, the firms, public sector, and it's like, what is happening?
Sure.
What are people's concerns? Sure. And then how do we then put all of that intelligence in one place and say, here's how to go forward? Yeah.
Okay. Here's a controversial question, if you don't mind me asking. Some eminent citizens and rights organizations in India recently signed an open letter asking that the Aadhaar model not to be repeated across the world so quickly. They warned of social exclusion, centralization of database, biometric identity, and the danger that they flashed was it can be turned what is an excellent tool for welfare can also be a dangerous tool for social control. So that's their point of view. How would you address that? Is that a fair criticism?
No, I think it's a very limited criticism, all right? I mean, in the early days of Aadhaar, there were lots of concerns about data breaches. And
Correct.
there have, in fact, been a few. All right, and there were also concerns about, the government controlling this large trove of data about its citizens. There was this Orwellian sense of Big Brother watching you if that kind of data is controlled by the government. But the thing is, there haven't really been worrying real-world consequences of these concerns, all right? I mean, the benefits of Aadhaar,
Oh, for sure.
99.9% of adults in the country use that and use an Aadhaar-related service every month, all right? And we have a population of 1.4 billion people. Think about the benefits. So I think this is it's a very limited and limiting view.
Fair enough.
I mean, of course, look, every technological system has its risks. None of them are foolproof, right? Aadhaar is bigger than most. It will have risks which are compounded because of its scale, but I don't think that takes away from its strength as a system at all, really. So.
Yeah. Finally, I will open the floor for questions. But before I do that, one bullet, really rapid fire answer, and you have to do it in one line or one sentence or two sentences only. How can the global South countries hedge themselves against the great power digital sector rivalry? Your idea of global South countries, how can they hedge themselves against this pressure from the great power digital sector rivalry? We know what you are talking about. So, very short.
I'll just take the thought from what Anirban was saying earlier, and all of us echoed, is bring cooperation and collaboration.
Okay, good.
And share, that's it.
Excellent.
I think collaboration, key thing. Yeah.
China is not part of the South.
they do say so. They do say so.
But if we are going to frame this properly, China is not part of the South.
Nor from the north.
Not from the north. And I think the collaboration must bring politics and the private sector quite closer to each other. Not a takeover, but a collaboration.
Do the hard thing, build.
Excellent.
Again, cooperation, collaboration, and public-private partnerships among these middle powers, all right? I mean, they need to work together much more closely than ever before. So, that's
perfect. So, open for questions. 15 minutes to go.
Okay, this is a little technical and I'm not very good at explaining this, all right? But what DPI has done is created a system of what they call account aggregators and consent managers. So using that, a user actually has a reasonable amount of control on what exactly his or her data is being used for, okay? And it can withdraw from those agreements at any point. So, you can negotiate the contract in terms of how your data is going to be used, exactly what purpose it will be used for and by who, and you can opt out of it at any moment. Now, in principle, this is somewhat similar to this set of data rights that is one of the centerpieces of the GDPR. Now, the GDPR is really the most stringent piece of data legislation in the world, right? And it gives these EU citizens a set of data rights which allow them to do exactly that. The right to be forgotten, the right to control your data, the right to withdraw data from a user if at some point you need to do that. Okay, so that's what DPI tries to do. And so far it's being used largely for financial data in the financial sector, and it has proved reasonably successful. So, that pilot that I talked about where, data was being to create, AI was being applied on top of this sort of financial data to create products, very encouraging results. It actually worked, and it has proved to be quite secure. So, yes.
Actually, in my notes, as I was flying yesterday, I wrote AI-DPI, who decides?
Very close, yeah.
Because...
But I work for a law enforcement.
Yeah.
organization, and we have so many privileges from AI, but also we have the biggest risk and fear.
No,
at the same time.
absolutely. And of course, as a government, you want to gain the trust of your citizens without feeling that you are selling them off to the private sector. There's always a queasy attitude towards the private sector in any society, because the private sector has always told us what it is about. It's about profits and not people. And then when we think about people, planet, profits,
purpose,
it becomes an interesting question. And when you talk about AI solving or generating, instruments for us to detect risk, which means it's beneficial to government because our early warning systems on particular things could actually, be fast-tracked. But who decides and who becomes the central authority of whether we're talking about data centralization as an issue or, I mean, the earlier question was actually quite instructive as well, because in South Africa, what has actually generated a lot of DPI to an extent is a sense of insecurity. So when you go to the gated estates where people live, you don't have rights to say, I withdraw my biometric. You want to visit the person in there, they're taking a facial image. By the time you exit with your car, you just put your face on the camera and the boom gate opens. So the truth about it is that I think the ethical question is far from being addressed. And the risk factor is far from being addressed. And of course, because innovation tends to precede regulation, so regulation is always trying to do the hard work behind the innovation. And by the time you've regulated one act of innovation, there's a new act of innovation. It's a runaway train, right? And therefore, I think the short answer is that it's not clear who decides, and the government control over it is not well established. And I think the end user control over their own data is not well established. We can talk about the safeguards and the protocols that are there.
In practice.
The truth about it is that in action, in practice, I mean, you're not going to read the terms and regulations.
Who's going to read them?
3 pages just to access a website. You're just going to click and get onto the website and go on. In any fact, we are all going to die. Human beings. That's another reality. So maybe it doesn't really matter in the big scheme of
those things. Right. No, building on what he said, I would approach it in a different way slightly. One is to say that the AI question you've asked might possibly eventually reflect the stance of the state involved. So I'm drawing from 2 experiences I've had in the last week. One is I was in Nigeria. I had opened an account on a fintech investment platform to buy stocks and shares. It took them 2 weeks to verify my identity. And the stock exchange has built a DPI that allows them, the platform, to just go and check against your name or something, and then you then have only one, like a number to invest across all shares. So this platform took 2 weeks, and I said, look, this takes too long. I went to another one, all of this on my phone, I didn't speak to anybody, and they got me the thing in 6 hours. So I went back to the first one and said, hey, I don't need you anymore. I don't want this account anymore. And then they said to me, we can lock your account, but we can't close it. I'm like, what does lock mean? I'm like, oh, you won't have access to the account. But I'm like, you will? They're like, yeah. I'm like, but the goal is I don't want an account. And they're like, we don't have that option. So I said, okay, fine. I will check with SEC, which is the Institution for Stocks, and FCCPC, which is the Institution for Consumer Protection. In half an hour, they had closed the account. And that's just reflective of the state's stance on privacy, on protection. And then they sent me a text saying, look, we've closed the account. Like, it's okay. Don't call anyone. Right. I have another, I've had for the last few months.
That's interesting.
A role, apart from my day job, or built on my day job as an advisor to the Minister of Trade, same country. And we got a note last week saying, don't put anyone's data in Claude, in chat, or in anything. You can't use those tools for everyday work. So again, you see the stance of the state in saying you can't put people's data into these public things.
domain.
And so that's one approach. Now, there might be another state that may not necessarily have evolved into that sort of rights protection and all of that. And you might find that their approach to all of these things might be more like, this is actually great. We want to know what everyone's doing. We want to know what you had for lunch, how you buy food, right?
So the key thing is, and that is also only evolving. So the key thing is, who can take the data, what data can be in, how long it can be stored, how it be shared. All those things has to become part of the regulatory framework. Forget AI for a second.
Definitely.
So that itself is evolving. Like GDPR is extreme on this side. The Americans are extremely on this side. In India, we sit somewhere in between. Okay, the country takes a policy. It's like saying that it is like any other policy.
It's an opinion.
It's like saying that,
Yeah.
will you have an open economy? Will you have an open exchange rate?
Exactly.
All those things. So each country will decide what is good from the data usage. Second thing which is more important, and thing is even that has taken a lot of time to reach here. Second, now I'll come to your point about AI. There again, we need to develop the regulation, because as you said, technology is going faster, the regulation has to come slower. But when it comes to governmental usage, they can start by putting principles on what kind of AI is going to be used for what purpose, and put a ring fencing with respect to the lessons that is being allowed to be learned, what data is being used, and what decision is being taken, and how much human intervention should be there. So these are the places where you can start putting the initial stage. What are we using? What model are we using? What is the human intervention? Yeah, to what level human intervention? So if you create, and then it becomes a sort of iterative process.
Authorization level.
Yeah, correct. So I just leave it there.
I think the role of context is very important. So small language models, I think the key thing is that you can have them on small devices, and that they can capture a small localized context of what you're trying to do. So how do you train them for cultural nuances? And again, I think this is the way at least it's happening now is, the way AI has evolved. 10 years, not even 10, 8 years ago, they had models that were extremely biased, and people just sort of used them and sort of went with them.
Correct.
But it has changed quite a bit over time. And now actually there's a group of people who think we are over-regulating and killing innovation. So there's bits and pieces to put together, but I think the key thing is to get the data and I think to customize it to the context. I think this is very important. Even in single countries, you can have multiple contexts. As you said, India, the context is quite different from EU. In Uganda, very different from Kenya, though people think Africa is homogeneous. So I think getting these specific contexts and getting the local skill there, and by skill, it means people who can develop at a high degree of technical skill these things. I think this is going to be very important. And once that is done, I think the foundations, then I think we can see these adaptations.
Can there be algorithmic interventions to make sure that AI sort of steers not towards what's widely available, but towards a lot more context-based answers? Is it possible? Technically possible?
It is technically possible, yeah. But but you need. There's a big component that you need the skill to do that. The skill needs to understand the context, so they need to be in that context.
Sure.
Okay. When we talk about skills, we must be granular and say the coders matter. So who's coding the thing? And what platform are they coding on? And what is available on that particular platform? Because, if you talk about India, I always make this example about India. India has invested in technology for the longest time. The India Technology Institutes, if you look at the history of just those institutions, it dates back to the late 1950s. So, of course, by nature of investment and being forward-looking in terms of where it wanted to play, India has a foot forward. But as you would have heard, from the World Economic Forum last week, the Europeans, French president, saying they want foreign direct investment from China, but they also want technology transfer from China. They don't like that Chinese are doing very well and they are producing a surplus in terms of their trade, their technologies. They want this transported to them. So there's there's actually quite an interesting technology deficit that is being recognized globally. And I think the question is, again, we talk about open source and so on, but I think open source goes only so far because we still want to retain the IP, we still want to retain the platforms. We don't want to transfer the ability for others to do it, because the only way you achieve the language and the cultural nuance is if you allow people who are from that culture, from that language, to be the coders. And the question is, how far are we willing to go in being open source?
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring the proceedings to an end. Join me in thanking our esteemed panelists, Ernest, Koshi, Lukona, Ife, and Anirban.
Thank you. Thank you.